Yeah, awesome. Okay, so hello and welcome to the Mountain Summit webinar. We are really excited that you're all here. So thank you very much for giving us your time and for coming on the call. So I'm just going to quickly run through a few pieces of housekeeping, and then I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. So we estimate that the webinar is going to be about an hour and a half in total. We're going to hear from Roger first and then have some questions, and then we're going to hear from Matt, and we're also going to have a Q&A with him as well. I have some questions that have been sent in, and then we're going to open up the chat. So please feel free to put any questions that you have for Roger and Matt in there, and Helen will handle those. Just so that everyone is aware, recording is in progress. It would be great that if you keep your cameras on, but just so that it's more interactive and that we can all see each other, as long as everyone is comfortable doing that. We are going to use some of the screenshots and clips on social media. So if anyone isn't comfortable with that, please just let us know, and then we won't include you in them. We really hope that you find this super valuable because the speakers have a lot of wisdom and experience to share. And that's valuable anyway, but especially in our current times, the socioeconomic landscape that we're in, the psychological stress that society as a whole has been under, this is more valuable than ever. And we really hope that, this is something that you can take away and that you can use in your businesses and in your life as well. So thanks to Nick and Helen for putting things together. Thanks to Roger and Matt for their time today. And thank you to all of the attendees. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Roger. He's going to share his presentation with you, and then we'll move on to some questions. So let's get started.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi, everybody, wherever you are. So I've got 30 minutes, and in that 30 minutes, I'm going to take a global view, then drill down into the UK and make some forecasts for the next 18 months. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and get on with it. So if we're looking at what drives the economy over a forward view of a couple of years, it's a very simple notion. It depends on how much money there is being generated by the commercial banking system, and during COVID times by central banks, how much money is being created and what's happening to that money. As you know, I think of the economy as a great big pipe with money going in one end of the pipe, and what comes out at the nozzle end is this thing, nominal GDP, which is the value of everything traded in a period of time. And of course, all those things have a monetary value, so therefore, money drives value. Now, how quickly the money changes hands depends on confidence. And confidence is driven by, have I got a job? What source of media do I particularly take notice of? And for 59% of the UK population, what's happened to the value of my house? How wealthy do I feel? So I want to go global. And I want to look at global money supply. You see, normally the money supply in the global system goes up by about 6% a year. And that drives global growth running at around 3%, and inflation in the world running between 2 and 3%. But when COVID happened and central banks started creating money out of nothing to finance their COVID support, global money supply grew by 14%. Now, the sum total of that money is 17 trillion. So it's just like another China has arrived on the Earth's surface. This China has $17 trillion to spend, but this China has brought with it no new materials, no new labor supply, no new houses. It's come with nothing except loads and loads of dollars. This is why we have global inflation running at 9%. It's due to too much money. Well, so what's going to happen? Well, you see, the great thing about inflation is trying to allocate loads of money amongst scarce things and people. So the price of everything goes up and the real purchasing power of the money goes down, and it keeps going down until it matches the availability of people and resource. And it's working very well. The UK inflation rate running at 11% means that people's purchasing power in the UK is certainly contracted by 3%, and the Office for Budget Responsibility thinks it will be another 5% contraction next year. Well, you see, the good news is by the end of next year, everything should be back in equilibrium, at which point the downturn, the recession, will end. So here's the chart of global money, and I've drawn in at that black line is at 6%, and countries move around, but basically 6% is what the world produces overall. And then you see the big peak, 2020 to 22, that's the COVID support. That's the money that's out there. That's the money that's trying to buy semiconductors, houses, grain, raw materials, gas, you name it. And I'll say it again, that money is not being added to. Yes, money supply is still growing in the global system, but if you look at where that arrow points, it's growing below trend. So we're not feeding the machine anymore, so prices must and will fall over this next 16 months. My screen has just seized, hang on. I'll hope it unfreezes in a minute. Sometimes this happens, normally just at the wrong moment. Sorry, everybody. This is a new machine. It shouldn't be doing this, but it has frozen. So I will keep talking and I know what's coming up. So if we now turn to the UK, the issues that we have in the UK are pretty unique. Other countries don't have the same mix of problems we have. And the first problem is massive underinvestment in our capital stock. This started to go wrong in 2016, the Brexit vote. The Brexit vote introduced massive uncertainty. It wasn't so much small companies, but big business basically stopped investing. Big business likes to see some stable future, and they're not inclined to take risks, so finance directors say no to capital spend. Our investment spending is now 40% below what it would have been, assuming the trend pre-Brexit had continued. I'm pressing my, right, good. So forget all that, I've gone there now. Chronic underinvestment, I'll show you the slide in a minute. A rapidly shrinking labour force, I'll show you the slide. A diminished global brand value, well, we all know that. And we've beaten Italy. We've had 4 prime ministers in as many years. And we also had Trussonomics, that budget at the end of September, which, well, I think there's only one word. People say I'm being offensive, but it was moronic. And it put the skids under the country. So let's look at how we've done. We are the only country of the G7, the group of 7 largest countries, that hasn't yet recovered to pre-virus levels of GDP. Fact, worrying, yes. What does it mean? It means it, in inflation-adjusted terms, strip out housing, no one in Britain has actually improved their living standards. There's the chart of investment spending that I was referring to. I've talked to it, I'll carry on. Now, in the UK, people say, oh, I've been investing, I bought a house. You see, the problem with most houses is they're not new. So when you buy a house that already exists, that's no investment. It's just an existing asset that's being traded. An investment in housing is only the 180,000 new builds that happen each year. Now, if we strip out investment in property, i.e. housing, you see the performance of the UK relative to our neighbours. And yes, we are at the bottom of the pile. All of this has impacted on our productivity. When your labour force is barely growing, the only way you get richer is with increasing productivity. We weren't doing badly up until 2008. We were in the top 2. However, since 2009, we're now in the bottom 2. This is entirely due to underinvestment. As a result, after-tax inflation-adjusted income average is no higher than it was in 2019. It's good, this, isn't it? I hope you're feeling really uplifted. So let's look at the problem. Let's look at the demographics. This is our demographics. If you look at that red vertical line, it's drawn at the beginning of the labour supply, 15 to 19-year-olds, the half of those that don't go on to university. They come into the labour force. Then cast your eyes up to the 60 to 64-year-olds. The 60 to 64-year-olds over the next 5 years will leave. And you'll see that what's coming in is less. And then go to the next group, go to the 10 to 15-year-olds. Those coming into the labour force is a lot less than 55 to 60-year-olds who will expect to leave. Our labour supply problem is a permanent feature of the next 10 years. Let's look at the arithmetic of where we are today. We have lost 1.3 million EU workers since Brexit. We've got 1.8 million fewer 15 to 24-year-olds. There are currently 1.3 million advertised jobs. We've got 600,000 people who've retired early in the last year. We got 3 million workers waiting for operations. Some of them, of course, will be at work, but others will be not. So supply has fallen by 3.6. Demand has increased by 1.3. Because of this labour shortage, first quarter of this year, average earnings, and this includes the public sector where earnings only went up by 2.5%, average earnings went up 7%, or 1.4% in real terms. In fact, our economy was booming until April of this year. So here's the economic pipe, and this is what's going on right now. I want you to note that what's coming out of our pipe is growing by 12%. And you might think, well, that's good. But of course, the inflation rate is now 11%. So real growth is hardly expanding. However, what's going into our pipe is only going up by 5%. Because of the time lag of money flowing through the pipe, that 5% in today will determine the value of what comes out a year from now. And that will be around 5%. If the inflation rate is still 5%, real growth will be 0. If the inflation rate is less than 5, real growth will be positive. So, basic message is today's money supply determines economic activity in the following 2 years. Here's the money supply data for the UK, and the blue line is the one that really matters. That's what's going into our pipe. The orange line is basically where the money comes from. And the orange line is bank lending. And normally those two lines move together. They only move apart when the Bank of England's creating money. And that's what you see in the big peak 2020 to 22. Okay, now, bit of behavioural stuff. Households, in my view, like to have a certain level of money in their current account, the just-in-case money, if you like. And if for whatever reason they have a lot more money in that account than they expect, the first thing they do is go out and spend it. And that's what creates a boom. Households trying to get rid of excess money. And that's exactly what was happening in the first quarter of this year. But then, come April, we were getting the warnings on the price of energy. And a lot of households were beginning to think, I think I need to have a bit more put away to cover my energy bills. And I've read the Daily Mail, and they say it could go up 3 times. And so households began to build their accounts. In doing so, they were cutting their spending on non-essential items. So here's the chart that illustrates that. It doesn't illustrate the spend, it illustrates what's happening to household accounts. The light blue bar is the monthly change in household bank accounts. And normally those accounts rise by 8 billion a month. You can see during lockdowns, household accounts rise substantially. That money is the wall of money that tried to buy everything after lockdowns ended. If you look where we are now, well, not now, you'll see in April, money balances were below what households were comfortable with. And then you see that blue line rise a bit, the blue bar. And that is households cutting back on non-essential spend. Here's the evidence. This is what happened to retail sales each month, year on year. You see the big boom at the beginning of this year, and then you see the whoops. What's going to happen to energy prices? And since then, households have been managing their liquidity, their net figure. And you see it there in retail sales. Is that going to persist? Well, do you know, it depends on the weather. If it's a very mild winter, I think we might avoid recession next year. If it's a really harsh winter, it's going to be quite a deep recession. It all depends on the weather. The Purchasing Managers Index, this is an index. It asks purchasing managers, are you increasing your order rate next month compared to this? And you can see how bullish purchasing managers were in the first quarter of this year. More than half of those surveyed said, yeah, we are putting bigger orders in. And then you see from August they begin to realize that the orders they put in have come through, but they haven't been sold. So they're now cutting back their new order rate significantly. This is the recession beginning. And this affects what's coming out of our pipe. You see, it was growing strongly in that first quarter, if you average it out, and now, well, basically not going anywhere. So everyone's interested in the housing market. It's a problem in the country we've got, but let's look at it. I've read the media. In fact, while the countdown was going on, there was a headline in the Financial Times: American houses dropped by 2%. And I thought, bloody hell, that's serious. So I got into the data. The rate of growth dropped from 12% increase to 10% increase. And this is the standard of reporting. It's absolutely appalling. So here we go. 80% of British houses are on fixed rate mortgages. This year, 600,000 remortgaged for 3 to 5 years. They're locked in to the pre-trust interest rate. Next year, 1.5 million householders will have to remortgage. Yes, their mortgage rate fixed will be around 5 to 6%. Yes, it's a lot higher than 2%. But if they took their mortgage out in the last 5 years, the mortgage lender would have had to be assured that they could maintain their lifestyle in the event of mortgage rates going from 2 to 5%. So this idea that swathes of households are going to be in trouble is wrong. The housing market is not going to collapse. Prices will not grow. They'll be static next year, but they're not going to fall. Oh, and if you've got a house with an EPC value of B or A, you'll be able to get a premium because of the insulation you've got. So here's the data. A third of homes are owned outright by 65-year-olds. A third of homes are mortgaged. That's the vulnerable group, you know, with young children. And a third are rented, 50% private, 50% state. You will have read in the press that the average house price is 7-8 times income. No one can afford a house. Well, first-time buyers paid a multiple of 3.6 times income because the vast majority of first-time buyers are a couple. Could be same-sex couple, it doesn't matter. It's joint incomes now. Half the workforce is female. Those who were moving house paid 3 times their income, and those who were remortgaging at 2.8 times. Those households that will be in trouble over this next year are not those with mortgages, they are those who are having to pay rents. Rents are rising, particularly in London, at 11% right now. In the rest of the country, around 6%. Now, when I tell people in my local pub this bit of information, they think I'm a communist. House prices in the UK, when you adjust for inflation, are no more expensive than they were in 2003. Fact, but you try telling people that. They just will not accept it. And if you look at that chart, it means house prices in real terms are going to grow below trend, certainly for another 5 years. So 2025 house prices will be recovering, but real growth will not, it'll be at best 1%. Right, many of you work for SMEs or you own them. And thank goodness for you, because the only way out of our productivity issue is smaller companies with the dynamism that's got them through COVID. You employ 61% of the workforce, you employ more than half, you produce more than half of our income. And you innovate much faster, and indeed you invest more than the big corporates. Until innovation increases productivity, our real growth rate cannot be much above 1%. Why? Our productivity growth rate is 0.5. Our workforce growth rate is 0.5. When Truss announced a 2.5% target, the markets, people like me, said you are bonkers. And by the way, the reason why the tax burden is rising is because we've got a lot of old, unhealthy people, and growth has not been there. So the tax burden is an inevitable consequence of lower growth. And we can't get it higher because we don't have the resource. So let's just look at exchange rates. I've nearly finished. This is the dollar against the pound. And that, I call it the moron premium on the dollar. That's when you could only get, well, it was 105 at the bottom of the market. Now we've got adults in the room, Sunak and Hunt. Sterling is beginning to strengthen, and I think we'll be looking at 120, 122 over the next year. So, to deliver a target of 2.5% real growth, we have to quadruple our productivity. That is a big ask. So here are my forecasts for next year. If it's a mild winter, we'll have a mild recession. Our economy will shrink by about 1.5% real. If it's a harsh winter, it'll shrink by 2.5%. If it's a mild winter, by the end of next year, our inflation rate will be down to 5%. If it's a harsh winter, it'll be up around 6.5%. I think earnings will grow by 5%. House prices will not grow at all. Bank rate, I think, is not going to go higher than 3.75%. Well, it might go to 4, but it will be back at 3.75 a year from now. Unemployment will only rise a tad. It's currently 3.6%. 4.7% is still full employment. There's the exchange rate. It will be a record year for insolvency practitioners and a record year for mergers and acquisitions. And a lot of people say, oh, there's a recession, this is going to be so awful. It's not. It's going to be a full employment recession, number one. Number two, and most importantly, the businesses that fail, and there will be a few, deserve to fail. They're the businesses that are carrying too much debt, are not delivering value to the customer, but are commanding scarce resources. It's a bit like when you look at your larder and you pick up a jar and you see, goodness, best by 1990. And you think the best thing I can do with this is chuck it in the bin. That's what a recession does. It clears the country of the date-expired businesses, releasing resource for the better-run businesses who will increase productivity. And by about 2025, we should be growing 1.8, but that will be the maximum. So it's not the end of the world at all. This is a mild recession, and don't believe the media.
Thank you so much, Roger, for sharing that really insightful talk. It sounds like you're saying there's a lot of opportunity to be had with whatever kind of recession comes along. So I'm going to move on to some questions that I've been sent, and then I'll pass over to Helen just in case we have any questions on the chat as well. So I've got a question from James here. The property market has long been considered as safe as houses, putting aside 2008. Do you foresee the continued shortage in housing and the aspirational want for privacy and luxury continuing to fuel the housing market for some time to come?
The answer to that is yes. There is a permanent shortage of homes, and that's why prices normally rise in line with average earnings. In recent years, they've risen faster because money has been free, basically. I don't see the property market failing in the sense of what happened in 2008-10. The market failed because the banks failed. This time around, banks have got loads of money and want to create loads more. So, yeah. Is property a good investment over the long run? Yeah, it is.
So with the above question in mind, also from James, can you ever imagine a reset on valuations taking place?
Well, that is a great question from James. And I do think we might have a big reset around 2028, 29. We'll know about 2 years before it happens, if it is going to happen. But that, you see, that it is likely the housing market, after this sort of little stable period next year, it'll take off again, because the mortgage business is like a little operation for the banks. The margins are small, so they pile it high and sell it cheap. There's not going to be a shortage of money. Oh, and by the way, the regulation changed in August, which means banks no longer have to ascertain whether the borrower can manage their lifestyle if mortgage rates are 3% higher. And this is what's going to fuel the market 2024 onwards.
Thank you. So a question from Mark. Thoughts on interest rates and property market for both commercial and residential?
Yeah, so base rate maximum 4%. Long run interest rate, which determines the fixed rate mortgage, maximum 4%. So fixed rate mortgage between 5.5 and 6, depending on how many years and what proportion of value. And floating rate mortgages, well, they'll be around 5, 5.5, 2. And I think that's tops. And I also think if we go into 2025, 26, they're not going to come down. I think we're in the new normal with those rates. A simple guide is you take a country's real economic growth rate, ours will be about 1.5, and you add 2.5 to get the correct basic rate of interest. So you can 1.5 plus 2.5, what is it? Work it out. It's where we are. We are at the right level.
A question from Federico. Is there any signs of southern Eurozone instability that would cause economic challenges?
That's a, see, I know we can think of Italy that's gone pretty right wing in the last few weeks. But fascinatingly, Italy has been reasonably stable over the last few years. There's been a wobble over Russian gas. No, I don't see problems in Southern Europe at the moment at all. Obviously, there's the immigration issue and the illegals. That is an issue for them. and of course, climate change, drought. But apart from that, I don't see the social fabric coming under pressure.
A question from Chris. Is the US dollar going to strengthen further against the pound?
No. No, I think from now on, it will stay around where it is. And, you know, if Brexit hadn't have happened, if you look at what's called the McDonald's index, it should be trading at 140. That is the correct value. But we've got that discount because of our domestic political situation.
Thank you, Roger. And finally, we've got a question from Nick. Which type of businesses will be the stars of the next decade?
Aha. Well, any business that's involved with back office automation, any business that's involved with green energy, any business that is to do with pets, any business that offers experiences for the over 60s, healthcare, private medicine, they're all going to do really well. And any business in any sector that innovates faster than its competitors.
Thank you so much, Roger. So I'm just going to hand over to Helen now. And we've got about 10 more minutes just for more questions in the chat. So over to you, Helen.
Hi, folks. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So Michael has asked, I'm thinking about extending my house. Should I delay the project until 2024, waiting for material prices to drop?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. They will drop end of 2024, beginning of 25. And if it's not an urgent job, in other words, you're not being nagged, yeah, delay it.
Well, that was a nice, simple yes question, wasn't it? That was a good one. And Nick has asked, what levers do we have to improve productivity?
Right. Now, that is an interesting one. The best way to answer that, Nissan in Sunderland is the most productive plant that Nissan have on the planet. I've been associated with subsidiaries of German businesses operating in the UK, and the German management says this idea that the British worker is unproductive is absolute nonsense. The problem is that so many businesses don't train or give the worker the best tools to work with. So the answer to the question is, any business that invests in leadership, invests in training, really gets their culture G'd up and doesn't penny pinch on plant, equipment, facilities, will be productive.
That's good to know, especially, yeah, leadership and investment. I think that's, yeah, there's lots of like things going on in my brain right now, because it's nice to hear something that's not kind of on the news or the media right now, kind of instilling fear into people. I think probably quite a few people wanted to ask that question about the media as well. So I have one more question for you. Is the UK FTSE a success of the past and second rate moving forward?
The thing about the FTSE 100 is it's got very little to do with the British economy. 70% of FTSE 100 companies earn their profits in dollars. So actually what drives the valuation is what's happening to the value of the dollar against sterling. And if you look at the last 10 years, if sterling strengthens, the FTSE goes down. If sterling weakens, the FTSE goes up. It is not a barometer of the state of the UK. It is an indicator of currency gains or losses. By the way, if you want to get a sense of what's really happening in the UK, look at the FT 250, what's called the mid cap, and you'll find that that is at the same value, or no, it's about 1% higher than it was pre-COVID. And therefore it's a true representation of the nation's output, which is, it's flat.
What I'll do is I'll find that and I'll link that when I send out the recording for everybody, so you can have a look at that, folks. I'll make sure that's part of the email that I send out later. Stuart has asked if now would be a good time to invest in buy-to-let properties.
Okay. The answer to that is, if Stuart intends to be a good landlord, and I'm being serious here, the answer is yes. If Stuart's going to ensure the house or houses have an EPC rating of higher than C, yes. If he's not borrowing the whole purchase price, the answer is yes. It is a good time, but you've got to be good. If you're a dodgy landlord, the government is after you. So there's the answer.
Good. James Roberts has made an observation that I will read out. In a work from home culture operating flexibly, investing in training and motivating team must point to the need for improved levels of effective leadership, especially people skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the real challenge is how you get a culture, an energetic culture, when people are doing what we're doing right now. And there's no doubt that hybrid working is here to stay, but firms that understand what drives productivity will certainly be getting people together perhaps once or twice a week, just to ensure that everyone understands each other and what the whole mission of the business is.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, definitely. Stuart replied saying he's renting to his mother-in-law, so he better be a good landlord.
Well, do you know, I think renting to your mother-in-law is fraught with difficulty. That's one thing I wouldn't do.
I don't think you'd ever be a good landlord, would you? If you rented to your mother-in-law. And Matt Fowler says naturally performance coaches are an absolute must.
Absolutely.
That might be a slightly biased comment there, Matt, but I'm sure it's still valid nonetheless. Absolutely. We have one more question. We've got a few more minutes to go. How will the UK perform against other countries in the medium long term?
Oh, I'm going to be blunt. If you look at that investment spending, we've basically lost 7 years. So we're going to have to really go some to match the performance of our neighbours. But we're British, and once people understand the true reality of where we are, and once we get a government, regardless of its political colour, that does what we want government to do, which is do a lot of boring things really well. Once we get that, I think we'll climb back. I am writing a piece on the future, and all I'm saying is I want government not to be stupid. So that means not ignoring the EU. Yeah, we've left it. No, we're not going to join, but it's the biggest market on this earth, and we should not be ignoring it and making it difficult for our companies to trade with it. So it's going to be a long old climb, but I'm sure we'll get there. We might have to have euthanasia on the way, but there we are.
Well, I think there's probably a few people who might agree with that. We don't have any more questions, but if anyone has like any last minute questions, otherwise we can have a couple of minutes to either grab a water or have a loo break before we kick into gear with Matt. Jenna, what's your next steps here?
So we don't have any more questions on my end. So if people would like to take maybe like a 2-minute break, then that's fine, and we can crack on with Matt's presentation at 10:02.
Thank you so much, Roger. That was so, it's really enlightening, and it's really helped me personally. I'm sure it has everyone else as well, just knowing that it's not all about the media and scaremongering and things like that. As somebody who's in my position as well, it's nice to know, especially kind of taking the plunges that I am doing in the coming year as well. So thank you so much for your time on that. It was really helpful, and I think everyone would agree. Despite the fact that we've had no Chester, we want Chester back.
I can get Chester back. He's asleep on his bed in the other room. I didn't bring him in because if he hears his name, he'll be up on this screen.
Oh, well, I don't think anyone would have a problem with that right now. We all fell in love with Chester a little bit at Mountain Summit, didn't we? Very quickly, just while everyone's, there's a few disappeared for the loo, I think, but James mentioned, and Robert Jones. So James has mentioned, with things like the introduction of digital nomad visa, etc., do you see more measures coming into place that sidestep Brexit?
Well, you see, I do think that the great British entrepreneur is so adaptable. They always find ways round. If they want to trade with someone, they will find a way. So the answer to that question is yes. I think there'll be increasing attempts and examples of getting around the constraints that Brexit presented for British business. Yeah.
Right. I think we've got about a minute to go before we kick into gear with Matt. So I've got two last questions. Which industries are most likely to struggle in the next few years? And are there any countries that are setting the right example for us to follow right now?
Well, if we take industries, I think it doesn't matter which industry you look at. If you look at within the industry, in any industry that has high-end customers, they're going to do just fine. I was looking at some stats yesterday. The number of super yachts ordered is running at 1,100. That's up 30% on last year.
Wow.
A super yacht is anything over 80 meters in length. It's huge.
Yes,
so the rich, the high end, they'll always be there, regardless of what industry. The middle market is the one that gets under pressure when households are reassessing their cash position. So I would suggest some of those sort of mid-market eating places are going to go, like Ziz's. I've just made that up. But if you're in a pizza business or you're in a kebab business, you're going to be absolutely fine. The bottom end of the market is going to be fine. It's the middle market that will wobble. Whether it be cars, whether it be food, whether it be clothing, I think that rule applies.
Excellent. One word answer as we finally come to a close. What country, are there any countries that set an example for us to follow right now?
Well, that is, set an example is an interesting word. If you look at, I'm not going to answer it directly because each country is unique. For example, Singapore sets a brilliant example, but we wouldn't put up with the dictatorship of that country. Germany does pretty well in some areas, not others. The Nordic countries, I mean, Denmark is the happiest country on earth, but a lot of Brits don't like the look of the taxation levels. I think the problem with the UK is we want Danish public services with American levels of taxation, and you can't have it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to hand you guys back to Jenna now. Thank you once again, Roger. We couldn't do this without you. You're a staple mountain summiter now. Thank you so much for everything. Give Chester some big loves for us later. I'm sure you'll forgive him for his bad behaviour with his ducks previously. But Jenna, I will pass it back over to you. I'll continue to monitor the messages, folks. So any questions that come up with Matt now, please fire them in. Also, if I could ask that some of you, if you're comfortable doing so, please put your cameras on, because I know that Matt likes a little bit of face-to-face time. So if you can, that would be great, but obviously no pressure if you're uncomfortable doing so. Otherwise, I'll hand you back to Jenna. Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you so much, Roger, for that really great talk as well, and for answering everybody's questions. I think it's really valuable to have someone like yourself, you know, in this gathering of entrepreneurs to, like Helen said, get a little bit of clarity instead of feeling confused and conflicted watching the media. So I'm going to hand you over to Mr. Matt Fowler now. So Matt, if you're ready to share your slides, then I'll hand it over to you. You've got about 20 minutes for your talk, and then we'll do the same and we'll go to questions for Matt as well. So if anyone's got questions, just put them in the chat and we'll do the same. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. Nice to see or not see you all. Just before we start, having listened to Roger, really, as ever, very stimulating and interesting. A couple of things I'd like to say. The first one is I'm not a dodgy landlord. And the second one is I haven't ordered a new super yacht as of yet. My presentation to you today is entitled Challenging Times Are a Time to Challenge Your Thoughts. And somebody asked a really pertinent question. They said, which industries are going to be and sectors are going to be the stars of the next decade? And I would say, to build on what Roger said, I would say those who believe they will be and those who think they can be. So that's something to bear in mind and one of the themes of my talk. So it was interesting that Roger talked about the news. So I'm of a particular vintage, and I remember when the news actually used to end, it used to say, and now, and they used to have what I would call a good news story, something that was uplifting and positive. But I have to say that that isn't my recent experience of the news. Everything we read is negative, whether it's about war, and Roger's specialist subject being the economy. And it was just interesting, I wrote down that Roger said there that actually there was a headline figure in the news that he picked up on that the American housing market had fell by 2%, but in reality, it had fallen from 12 to 10. But there is no real news in saying it's 10%. The news is in getting us to think that there is catastrophe. So I just wanted to reflect on the influence our environment and things like the news have on us. I'm not sure whether you're aware, but our subconscious mind never sleeps. So when we go to bed, our subconscious mind starts by processing that which we've just read, seen, or experienced. So if you go to bed, having watched the BBC News, you are likely to go to bed with your brain positively, negatively, processing a poor story. So I suppose, why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because our subconscious is perpetually and consistently bombarded by negative things. And I would say to you, in these challenging times and looking to grow and build your psychological resilience, I would say the most important thing is actually to have a belief that we can master psychological resilience, and that there are techniques to help the brain to help us, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I've just spent the last 9 months, and actually there's some people on this call who've helped me in my research. I just spent studying psychological resilience in entrepreneurs. And I was actually really stimulated by our conversations on Mountain Summit to get really deep on that subject, because there is lots of psychological research into resilience in sort of clinicians, in the law, and lots of other professions. But actually, considering how important you as entrepreneurs are, very little research into that space. But I thought it'd be really good to just give you a little bit of basic psychological theory around resilience. And I'm going to read here from the British Psychological Society. So, what is resilience? Well, resilience is defined as the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, behavioural explicitability and adjustment to external and internal demands. Wow, that's a mouthful, isn't it? So let me tell you what's really interesting when you study resilience in a little bit more detail is there are two schools of thought in psychology. There are those group of psychologists who are called the traitists. And the traitists believe that actually you are born with resilience or not. So it is something that is genetic. And on the flip side of that construct, there are those called the developmentalists who actually believe that it's something you develop through life experience, exposure, etc. So I was very keen to explore that in my research with entrepreneurs. So let's talk a little bit more about what I found. And I found good news, everyone, really, really good news. So the first thing I found is this, that we can build resilience and it can be learned. So I'm not in the camp of the traitists who believe that it is an innate capability. I believe we earn it through our experience and the fact that we can learn it. And there are 6 main predictors. The first one I found was that you have a positive and a proactive personality. So that isn't about seeing everything in the world as positive, but it is attacking those things that are going on in the world with a positive mindset. The second thing is that those people who are most resilient and are those who have the greatest sense of control. And what I mean by that is they have the keenest sense of what they can control and therefore by definition what they can't. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit more detail. The third predictor is experience and learning. So experience, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is key, but actually putting yourself in the learning zone where you're able to learn new skills, coming on a webinar with the likes of Roger and I, etc., that type of thing. The fourth thing is that resilient people have balance and perspective. We'll talk more about that later. They are flexible and able to adapt. And the final thing is, and this is super, super important, is they have what I would call social support. They have an ecosystem of people who can relate to their experiences, provide them with new perspectives, and actually be there for them to listen and whatever. So their ecosystem is enabling rather than disabling. So this brings me on to talk to you about a model that I use in almost all of my coaching, which is our incredible thinking model. And I just think it's worth sharing this with you to give you some perspective. So if we want to change our circumstances and results, well, we have to accept that all that we have in our life and the things we achieve are a direct result of the habits we have. Some of us have positive habits in some areas of our life. Some of us have negative habits. If we want to change our circumstances and results, particularly in challenging times, then it is a given that we have to develop more positive habits. But here's the thing. Habits don't just happen. They are a result of our behavior. So repeated behavior, as you all know, delivers our habits. But our behavior just doesn't happen. Something precedes that, and it's our emotions. So those who know me well would know that I talk a lot about the fact that 100% of our behavior is influenced by our emotions. So where our behavior is at its most positive, it will drive positive behavior, which repeated will drive positive habits and will change our circumstances and results. But our emotions don't just happen. They are preceded by our thinking. So the premise of this model is this. If our thoughts center on us believing that we have the ability to resilience, then it will help us to make better choices. And since we're making better choices, we are more likely to be able to be creative and resourceful and achieve better results. A great example of this, some of you may have heard of Viktor E. Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who was imprisoned in multiple prisoner of war camps during the Second World War. including Auschwitz. And he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. And I think it illustrates perfectly the power we have to control our thinking and put whatever's going on in our world in perspective. So I'm going to read with you probably the most powerful quote I've read from any book I've studied, is this, that he said that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstances and to choose one's way. And in the most challenging of circumstances, he was able to find a way to create purpose around surviving and being able to tell his story and make a difference in the world. And I think for all of us right now who are heading into this time of economic uncertainty, it's worth thinking about that. So what are the things I found, there's three top nuggets and secrets of resilient people that I can share with you? Well, the first one is the resilient people kind of get their head around tough shit happens. And the fact that tough shit happens, it allows them to have a perspective that says, you know what, I am not a victim when these things happen. I am actually somebody who actually doesn't feel discriminated against. So many people I meet actually talk using victim language and feel discriminated against. When the reality is, I would say to them, rather than thinking, why me, why not think, why not me? So if you want to be truly psychologically resilient, I would say, focus on actually accepting that tough shit happens. Adversity is something that is around all of us. And as entrepreneurs, the more we embrace that, the more resilient we're likely to be. So the second thing is resilient people are really, really good at choosing where they select their attention. They focus on things they can change, as I alluded to earlier, and they don't burn any energy on the things they can't. And you know what's great about that? That is a vital and learnable skill. Many of you on this call may well have heard of a guy called Stephen Covey, a seminal author and consultant and leadership coach. Well, he taught very much, one of his 7 habits of successful people was a thing called the circle of influence and concern. And he talks about the most successful people, whatever is going in the macroeconomic environment, whatever stuff is being thrown at people, is those people who are able to have a large circle of influence, i.e. the stuff that they can control, their attitude, where they spend their time, the quality of their thinking. That's as big as it can be, as opposed to the things, some of the things that Roger's describing in the macroeconomic environment that frankly none of us on this call can do much about. And I would say this, and we go back to how we think. Roger gives a really, really interesting and quite encouraging perspective on economic data, and it's certainly not the one that we're peddled in the mainstream media. So I just thought it'd be worth sharing with you why it is we are so predisposed to absorb negative emotions. So we're hardwired for it. And it's the fact that negative emotions, due to a thing called emotional contagion, stick to us like Velcro. And unfortunately, guys, the things that are more positive actually tend to brush off us like Teflon. So that's due to this. It's due to a thing that many of you well know, which is the reptilian part of the brain. The reptilian brain is what controls our fight or flight response. And actually, that is what is constantly scanning the environment for what is there to physically harm us. But the reality is there is very little that is around us that is actually going to physically harm us. But our brain, the reptilian brain, at the heart of the limbic system, it's that actually means that we are predisposed to absorb negative emotions like they're Velcro. Now, there is a process of resilient people use, and it's called in psychology benefit finding. And it's about the process of deriving growth from adversity. And the founder of modern positive psychology, of a guy called Martin Seligman, and in 2005, he actually did an experiment across multiple people across 6 months where he asked them to do something very, very simple. And he asked them to actually write down 3 good things that happened to them every single day for 6 months. And then he measured their levels of happiness, gratitude, and they all went up quite significantly. And they had less episodes of depression and less episodes of feeling down. So the reality is, point 2 is that actually become benefit finders and train your brain to spot the negative and learn to actually turn down the noise from your reptilian brain. The final point is this whole notion of being kind to yourself. And the roots of this for me, and I talk to a lot of my clients about this, are in therapy, which is this. Resilient people ask themselves, what I'm thinking or doing, is it helping me or is it harming me? It's a really powerful question. Think about it. If it's me, and I was quite inspired by a woman I met who gave a seminal talk about the loss of a daughter. And she talked about this. She was a psychologist, and she talked about this and its impact on her. And she used the example of, after the loss of her daughter, she found herself spending a huge amount of time in a daughter's bedroom, looking at her daughter's belongings and looking at photos of her daughter. And she got to the point, she said to herself, is my continuing to do this, is it helping me or is it hurting me? And the answer for her was very, very clearly, it was hurting her. So she made the difficult decision to stop doing that. Now, the reality is you are going to be faced with lots of things over the coming weeks and months, whether it's cash flow problems, whether it's a loss of customers. But I would say this to you, if you live life more consciously and you learn to intercept your emotions, you can actually, I said everyone should have a performance coach. You could actually become your own coach, which I'd love for most of you, not all my existing clients if there are any on the line, but actually, and be a lot kinder to yourself. So there are 3 tips for you in terms of you becoming more psychologically resilient. Now, let me summarize that by telling you what I think are the meta themes before I take any calls. So the first thing is accept that adversity and challenge don't discriminate. That stops us being victims. It helps us be more resourceful. You can gain control by managing your thoughts, think about what you're thinking about and use some of the techniques we talked about. Psychological resilience can be built. It's not innate. It's something that can be developable and earned if you choose to earn it. And the final thing is the strategies I've talked about are readily available, but we have to have a willingness to give them a go. And the thing is, it's a bit like going to the gym. You can't try these things for 1 or 2 days and expect to have a discernible difference. You're going to have to commit to maybe 1 or 2 of these things and give them a go. And I think you'll find your resilience being built. So that's it from me in terms of my slides, but I'm really happy, to field any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that talk. That was really, really interesting. One of the things I picked up on there from you is that enabling ecosystem. I like the phrase of that, and I think that's what we've created here, an enabling ecosystem where everyone can come together and discuss these topics. So I'll go to the questions that I've been sent for you, Matt. So I've got a question from Katie. With so many people influenced by fear in the media, how/what advice would you give to leaders to get the best out of their teams?
Well, the first thing I'd tell them is to tell them to stop reading it. So a simple technique would be is to find a way. We all want to know what's going on because I think it's important as entrepreneurs and business leaders. But I would say, channel when and how you expose yourself to the media. So the last thing I would do is start my day with the news or finish my day with the news. I would consume the news at a point where I actually have my highest levels of emotional resilience and the highest energy levels. And I would minimize the amount of time that I spent reading the news.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there's lots of wonderful resources out there now, for example, webinars, podcasts, things like that, where we can get alternative information. And I think that conscious exposure is a really important point. We've got a question from Helen as well. How does a typical session with a coach go? And how often is it beneficial to have a coaching session?
Well, okay, wow, that's a really interesting question. So, in terms of what was the first part of the question? Sorry, Jenna. Again, Helen's questions are always insightful. I do apologise, but yeah, what was?
So the first part of the question was, how does a typical session with a coach go?
Okay.
And then the second part is, how often is it beneficial, or how frequent should you have a coaching session?
It depends what you mean by a typical coach, because I'm not sure I'm a typical coach, although I do have a peer group and I do have some supervision. But I would say this. So a typical session starts with the individual bringing whatever's on their mind to the session. So a great coach will have the ability to quickly build some rapport, but actually think about what's on the person's mind and what will be highest value within the session, so that when they come out of when they leave the chair or leave the session, they've actually felt they've got some actionable strategies in there. But you may also be working on a program of work with an individual, and that will be a continuum. In terms of frequency, I would say I probably started my career doing 2-hour sessions with people once a month. That tends to have evolved with some clients to sort of little and often, 45 minutes every other week and things like that. So it can be dependent. I equally have some clients who like things to be immersive and might spend half a day with me once a quarter.
So I've got a question as well for you, Matt, and then I'll pass over to Helen to answer the questions in the chat. So how often is it that you meet leaders that have that kind of emotional control that you're talking about? So I guess emotional intelligence or control that they can then convert into their leadership, versus people that are being overly influenced by fear, for example, from the media or whatever else might be going on?
Well, I think I'm very fortunate that I meet lots of leaders who have what I would call high degrees of emotional intelligence. They have they're all 4 or 5, depending on what your belief system is, quadrants of emotional intelligence. I would say it's pretty good. I think the one thing I would say about being an entrepreneur, CEO, a leader is that actually it can be pretty lonely. And often the function that someone like me might perform is to actually help them basically listen and help them regulate that emotional control. But I have to say, I work with a broader leadership group that have, strong levels of emotional intelligence, and actually I believe are conducting themselves brilliantly well through this crisis, because the reality is that it's far easier to be a great leader, isn't it, and a successful entrepreneur when things are going well, but much harder when things are going badly. So yeah, I'd say there's a lot of emotionally intelligent leaders out there. I won't be drawn on particular sectors and professions where I find less levels of emotional intelligence, because they might end up watching this webinar, and I want to continue to work with them.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to pass over to Helen now to answer any questions in the chat. Over to you, Helen.
Well, I'm going to ask them rather than answer them, because I think I'll leave that one up to Matt. But first one is, what tips can you give to handle anxiety?
Wow. Well, listen, the first thing I would say is I think it's important to know what your strengths and skills are and what they're not. So from my point of view, I'm not a therapist. Yeah, that's not my space. So what I would say to you is that I think is to really understand whether the anxiety is something that's been with you for quite a while, or whether the anxiety is triggered by certain events that are happening at the moment. So I would say to those people who have deeply held anxiety is to maybe seek some professional help and therapy, some counselling, to really explore that. And I think those people where it's a temporary moment in time, I think some of the techniques I've talked about around, is the way I'm thinking helping or hurting me, some of those things. There are some more basic tools and strategies that can work. But I'm reticent to make some declaration around the right thing to do without talking to people personally, if I'm honest.
Excellent. Next question is, do you have any key book recommendations to help continue to build on resilience? Obviously, I've made a note of the Viktor E. Frankl book, which I'll link for everyone as well following up. But do you have any other that you would recommend to entrepreneurs and their team?
I wouldn't actually recommend books. I would actually recommend, I think there are some, to help us be resilient, and some of what I've tried to do today, the more we understand the way the brain works, I think the more helpful it can be. So we can have some ta-da moments where we say, that's why my brain's working against me. That's why I might be thinking that. And I think often the best way to understand the brain, because it's a really fast developing field, is to listen to podcasts and things like that. So I listen to, for example, to the Huberman podcast, which I quite like. I love some of the topics that he goes into and really explains the relationship between the brain and behavior and stuff like that. So I would just encourage people to have a little bit more exploration around the way the brain functions.
Excellent. I think a lot of people like to have podcasts as well because they feel like they're doing stuff at the same time as learning. I think a lot of people do these days, but maybe that might be one of the issues, is that we're doing too much at once. Maybe we should sit down with a book and take a break every now and then.
Can we multitask? Is that a thing? Well, psychologically, we can't multitask. What it is technically doing is task switching.
Yeah, I've heard about that recently. From a personal perspective, I've had some personal developments over the last year that have made me look at how my brain works in a different way to other people. And task switching was one of them that came up, and how some people are very good at task switching, i.e. what we would consider task. What's it called? Multitasking. That's quite interesting. We've had a comment from Mark saying that Nick once said to him that coaching in a leadership team is a great intervention for emotional hygiene.
Yeah, is that a bit like Roger said when he was, I concur. Yes, it's great. Yeah.
Holly also commented that in the book Game Changers by Dave Asprey, which was one of the books that we gave out at Mountain Summit, many leaders say that reducing the number of decisions they make each day help conserve their energy. Do you agree this helps? And how do we start doing this?
Well, it depends. It depends. So if by deferring decisions, it causes stress, which it does in some personality types, that can be unhelpful. Okay. So I would say being much clearer about what your priorities are and what's super important will probably lead to you having to make less decisions. But if you just defer decisions and you're someone who really gets stressed and anxious about carrying stuff into the next day, of which I work with lots of people like that, where ticking off the list and the ability to relax is predetermined by ticking stuff off that list, then that's not necessarily a helpful strategy. I think it's about changing the way you think about priorities and your own capacity. But not a bad point, Holly.
Would you say, this is a question from moi, that, I mean, I know it's kind of a buzzword at the moment, but there's a level of, you can almost go too far over as well and go into the toxic positive mindset where you try and make everything happy all the time and you end up running yourself into the ground. What are your thoughts on, the toxic positivity frame of things?
Well, I'm not, and I believe in positive psychology, but I don't believe in reframing everything as being positive. I think it's my view on positive psychology is developing the tools and techniques and thinking skills to actually be resourceful at a time that you need to be. But I think some people interpret positive psychology, so the layperson's view would be that you actually tell yourself that everything is great. I don't think it is about doing that. I think that's disingenuous, and I don't think it's helpful. So I'm not a massive fan, and I can see where you can turn into toxic positivity. But I would say this: a positive mindset will help you find and be resourceful in a challenging situation more than a negative one will. That's my view.
Yeah. Stuart has asked, what are the top things for business leaders to be mindful of when helping themselves and their teams navigate 2023?
Oh, well, that's I know who that's come from, and that's a big question. Well, I think the first thing to be mindful of is you can't lead your teams until you lead yourself effectively. So having a consistent set of practices and strategies that allow you to be at your best is probably the number one thing I would say. And then I think that getting the balance right between focusing on keeping your business profitable and doing all the stuff you do all the more, and also the developmental side of attending to the needs of the team, I think is really, really important. So I can see a focus, you know, and a slip in 2023 to more and more people work in their business than on it. And part of working on it is working on yourself and your team. And I would challenge, yeah, the time for stress management is when there's no time for stress management. The time for working on your leadership team is when actually there is no time to work on your leadership team. And to give you an example, and I hope she doesn't watch this, my wife has just gone on to a high performers leadership program in her company, and she's had access to a brilliant coach through another company. And I've been really keen to understand that process. But the first thing she said to me was, I don't really have time for this. I wish I could do it in January. I'm too busy now. And I said to her, maybe this is the right time for you to have that coaching, and why don't you embrace it? I think that's the risk in 2023.
Interesting. So we are coming to the end, but I would like to just finish off with Mark has commented to say, with regards to toxic positivity, he finds that you need to check with your heart as well as your mind. Intuitive guidance is important in his experience, which I completely agree with.
Well, I think those who know Mark know he's very wise, and I think that's advice, yeah.
Very much so. Well, we have come to time on you, Mr. Fowler. So thank you so much for your time today. It was massively helpful for a lot of people. And thanks for the link, Holly. I've copied that, and I'll make sure that that goes into the email replies to everyone afterwards for the Huberman podcasts, which I'll be interested in listening to. We are going to hand over the mic now. Oh, also, thank you, James, for your comment with regards to Nick and passing on the decisions to me. I can guarantee that that is not the case. What he does is he says, I've come up with an idea, which is the thing that I fear the most out of life and working for Mr. Wood, is I've had this idea, H. And then I know, you know, the proverbial's about to hit the fan, but you know, it keeps life interesting, doesn't it, folks? So I'm going to be handing over back to Jenna, and then I believe we are going to be hearing from our very own Mr. Nick Wood. So thank you all for your time tonight, folks. And again, thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt, for your talk there. Thank you to Roger as well. I think we've had a really nice balance there between kind of looking at a macro approach, you know, looking at the socioeconomic landscape and all the kind of wider view on things that might affect our lives and our businesses. And then we've kind of gone to a more personal and micro approach with Matt there of what we can control with our own psychology and, you know, what we're doing in our own lives on a more individual level. So I think there's been a really nice balance there. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Nick Wood now, and he's going to close the webinar. So thank you everyone for attending. It's been really great. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Jenna. Thank you, everybody. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. One of the main reasons why we do Mountain Summit and have done this webinar is building a business is really, really tough. And during the good times, the chances of succeeding and growing it to your vision is tough. And you know, there's so much negativity out there. But as Roger was saying before, there's so much opportunity out there. I know from my own experience that, you know, in the financial crisis, that the crisis enabled me to move forward more than any time. And I learned more and I gained more wisdom that I apply to where I am today. So yeah, if you see the negativity out there, smash it out of the park with everything that you've been learning today, and start to use your focus to find the opportunities. And as I say, that's the reason why we're doing Mountain Summit, and it purely comes out of my own experience and my own pain in previous crises. So thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you to Matt for being brilliant, and thank you to Roger with his decades of wisdom. I mean, how much knowledge can you take from Roger's slides and apply and avoid making mistakes? I always remember in 2006, Roger presenting in front of a couple of hundred people saying that the financial crisis was about to happen, the banking crisis. And, you know, I just sort of sat there and was like, I don't really know what to do with that. I haven't quite got the skills. But if you can really take his insights and apply strategies to them, you can do great things. So, you know, that stuff it's priceless in many ways. So thank you to that. Thank you to Helen and Jenna for working really hard to put on today's webinar. We've got many people are traveling around. We have Federico that's got his company, a law firm party in Portugal that can't attend today, who's a big part of our Mountain Summit event in April. So we're going to send out the webinar, aren't we, Helen, to people who can't attend, and we'll send it out to everybody else so they can watch it all again. It's been absolutely fantastic since April to observe the massive action that people have taken based upon what they learned from Mountain Summit. And I'm super excited to gain more feedback. One of the things that we did is we asked everybody to send a letter to themselves about what they were going to do, what they were going to achieve. And I believe the letters are going out in the next few days. Is that right, Helen? Yeah, I think that's right. So yeah, people are going to receive a letter and they're going to get the opportunity to read what they said they were going to do. I
realized I was on mute then, Nick, sorry.
Right.
But what I was trying to say, that I was very excited about telling everyone that the letters are ready to come out, they're ready to rock and roll, and I forgot I had my mic on, so sorry.
Yeah, great, wonderful. So we're gonna we had so much positive feedback about Mountain Summit in April, and it was our first attempt at putting on a business event to take conversations to the next level. So we are looking at coming back next year with Mountain Summit 2. You know, we really want to enable a community of entrepreneurs to go further and faster. And there's no point in doing it at the same level. We want to do it at the next level and take it higher and higher and enable entrepreneurs to move forward. So we're putting together an agenda right now. But to give you a little bit of a few sort of headlines on that agenda, we have a top restaurant entrepreneur that's going to be speaking at the event. We have an American tech CEO. We have a specialist in jiu-jitsu who will be taking us to the next level with our physiology. We're going to be talking about financial optimization, how to focus your business on the right dials. And we're going to have fire pits. We're going to have more time in the wilderness. We have a digital marketing entrepreneur that has done some amazing stuff in the digital marketing space. But one of the things that all of these speakers have is they've built businesses from nothing and gone through huge amounts of challenges. And I can't wait to put all of that agenda together to release it out there and to really enable people to walk away with next level strategies and mindset from which to move forward. So that's pretty much it. Start looking at it. Start looking for the content that we're putting out with the speakers. Tell people about what we're doing. And, you know, we just want to build a community to add value. And I think that's pretty much it from us. I know there's a big match going on this evening between Liverpool. That's because I've got my Liverpool mug in front of me. Between England and Wales. So hopefully England and Wales are going to go through, or just England. But that's pretty much it. Come on, Cymru. Yeah. So thank you very much indeed. Great to see your faces, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Thank you. Goodbye.